Welcome back, everyone. This is Authors Bantering. I'm Josh Bresslin, that's Ian M. Rogers, and this week we're going to be going over how to tell if you're making progress with your writing. Writing is inherently something that you do that's very solitary. You don't often get a lot of external feedback, and so the question comes up, how do you know you're getting better? How do you know that your time spent at the keyboard is actually improving your work? I think for me, the only way I can ever really tell is to compare it to other authors and comparing it to, and when I say comparing, I mean like critique groups, like giving it to other people to look at and to see and getting their feedback on it, or comparing it based upon feedback from agents, right? It's always an external thing. I can never really judge my own work. I always have to rely upon other people to sort of give me that kind of feedback. I don't know about you, Ian, but for me, that's the only way I can ever gauge anything.
No, I think that's really important, especially because, considering the alternative, there's plenty of writers who never show their work to anybody, or when they do, it's not in a way where they can get real honest feedback about it. And those are often the writers that don't improve, because they live in vacuums, they live in bubbles about like, oh, this is going so well and it feels good to me, so therefore it must feel good to others as well. But writing's not like that. There's plenty of things that sound natural to us because we're so used to hearing them. We know the stories in our heads. We know how we want it to sound. It can be really easy to kind of be oblivious to how something isn't working on the page. And so just showing your writing to people, critique groups, friends, people who are willing to read it and then honestly say, not just great job, this was really good, or something superficial like that, but say like, I didn't really understand where this was going, or this character really wasn't working the way you wanted to, or like, oh, I don't think you want to take this moral stance here, or you know what, these sentences are just clunky, things like that. And this can help show you, one, where you need to be developing your writing and what direction you need to be going. But then two, if you do this over a long period of time and you stop getting as many of those kinds of comments, that can be a really good indicator of how you're progressing.
Exactly. So, all right. So you definitely agree with me then that it does generally require some sort of external feedback that it does require others.
Definitely say generally. I think it is possible to gauge some of this on your own, especially if you're doing something like looking at something that you've written a long time ago. And when I say a long time ago, I mean like, certainly over 6 months, but a year or more. Or for example, for me, I always, a lot of my writing is done in the editing process. So I'll write, an Anne Lamott style shitty rough draft, get to the second draft, go back to the beginning of the first draft and be like, wow, what was I thinking when I wrote this? And then I'll, cross it off and kind of edit it. And so in that sense, I can see my ability to progress with a particular story.
Excellent.
And then even in some ways in general, because, I might have developed in other ways as a writer over the course of the 6 months or a year that it took me to write that draft. So I think it's possible to gauge a little bit of it on your own, especially over longer periods of time.
Awesome. Okay. So you do. All right. So you agree with that. All right. So because I agree in a sense that if you look at your older work, you do have the sort of like internal taste, like the sort of like thing where you can kind of just intuit that your work's a little bit better, like you can read it. But I think on your own, the only way to ever really, at least for myself, to tell if my writing's ever getting better without anybody else is if I look at my work and I can see that my sentences are being more clear. I'm saying more of what I want them to say, and there's not a lot of wishy-washy. There's not a lot of confusion in the prose.
That's the ability to look at your work critically, I think, is what you're talking about. There's this great Neil Gaiman quote where he talks about revision, and he talks about putting the draft away and then pulling it back and looking at it as if he had nothing to do with its creation. How a stranger or how a reader would look at it. And when you can do that and you can see the flaws in your prose, that's being a good editor, being a good reviser, and a good judge of your own work.
And the fact that you can see the issues of your prose means that you have improved. Like that's the biggest thing to keep on point.
Because bad writers don't see the issues in their prose.
Exactly.
Or unskilled writers, it will read cleanly to them, or maybe they'll think it looks strange, but like, maybe no one will notice, or maybe I don't know how to fix it, so I guess it's just okay, or something.
Bingo. Like yeah, the more mistakes you can view with your prose, the better that you are getting as a writer, which is a good sign. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it though, I feel it feels external, and it's kind of hard, right? Because you send something off maybe to like an agent, and you get 10 rejections, and like maybe half of them you hear back, half you don't. And the ones you hear back, they probably are just going to be standard rejections, right? You're not going to really know why it was rejected. And I make this point a lot about distinguishing between knowing preference versus quality. Let's get in the camera here. Preference and quality. So basically what I mean by that is you have to be able to recognize when something's getting rejected or when a piece of yours is not working based upon solely on preference. And I use the ice cream example a lot, right? If I have an ice cream stand there and I'm selling chocolate ice cream and I'm selling vanilla ice cream, if someone, doesn't buy chocolate and they buy vanilla, that's preference, right? They just happen to prefer that ice cream. You're still going to sell plenty of cones of chocolate ice cream, but you're also going to be selling a lot of vanilla as well. And you can't really complain no one's buying chocolate ice cream because vanilla, like the vanilla is just the preference there.
You're not selling vanilla,
right,
you're selling
right.
chocolate.
But now if I have an ice cream stand there and I'm selling chocolate ice cream and I'm selling dog shit, right? No one's buying the dog shit. It doesn't matter. Like, it's not preference. Your rejection of your piece.
I thought you were going to say you're selling chocolate ice cream and the ice cream stand up the street is selling better chocolate ice cream.
No. Oh, no. But see, even then, that's still preference.
Yeah,
right?
that's maybe the leveled up version of
exactly.
But yeah, the dog shit makes sense.
Exactly. If I'm selling chocolate ice cream, I'm selling dog shit, right? Nobody's buying dog shit. It doesn't matter. It's not preference. It's quality. Like, you just don't have quality ice cream because it's dog shit, right? Same thing with your work. You have to recognize that. Is your work being rejected just because no matter what, it's just not particularly good and you need to rewrite it and get better as a writer? Or is it the story, it's being rejected because, well, it's not really a genre that's selling right now. It's not something that they're a good fit for because they don't know how to market it or represent it. Is it something where I didn't do my research on them and it's just not something they represent at all? Is it more that they don't want to take a risk maybe on the word count of it, et cetera, right? Like, is it,
maybe you just got unlucky and you queried at the wrong time.
Exactly. Got to the slush pile. The
random chance,
the intern never gave it to him, right? Exactly. But it's true. And all of that is preference, right? All that is something that another agent may not find as a deal breaker, right? But if the quality's bad, no agent will ever accept it, right? That's always going to be a deal breaker. And so,
and it can be, as if you're an emergent writer just starting out, it can be really hard to know the difference.
Yes.
Between, I think it's easy to say like, oh, that agent just isn't interested in it or something like that. My manuscript must of course be in great shape or something like that. Or to take the reverse standpoint and say like, oh, I got rejected a bunch of times. It must be because my manuscript is bad. I think it's really hard to know one or the other when you're just looking at form letter rejections.
Yeah, exactly. And even as you get better, it's still difficult to know. Like, there's still times even I don't know, like, is it preference or is it my work not as good? And you should always try and consider that it's quality, that it is just your work's not good yet, because it puts the onus back on you and that you control that, right? It's something that you by default control. So you should always try and err on the side of that just because it's a variable that you can control versus the preference thing. But you may not. You may have written a really good book and it's just, no one's buying your vampire novel, right? Like, it's just not selling. Nobody's interested in it. It might be fantastic. It's just not a genre that's selling right now and you can't find somebody for it. And that's unfortunate. But
and this maybe goes back to kind of what you were saying before, is the idea of, outside critics. We talked about how agents can be harder to gauge, but, if you're showing your work to other writers who are just looking at it just as people, just as a book, to see how it's functioning, and they say like, wow, this is really good. This is in great shape. Maybe you could spruce up chapter 7 a bit, or this one character thing isn't really working. But, if you're getting consistent, solid thumbs ups from professional writers, people who know their shit and aren't just, kind of softballing you, I think that can be a really, really good gauge. More so than, agent rejections, which, as we just discussed, can be much harder to read.
Exactly. So it requires you to have some sort of external group, right? And generally it's critique group, right? We're talking about mostly as critique groups here. That's kind of your go-to. But just having somebody that can read it, that can look at it and go, okay, yeah, is this working? Is it not working? And giving you that kind of feedback. And then as time goes on, recognizing that you're getting less critical feedback. You're getting more positive feedback. As time goes on, looking at your own work and finding less mistakes with it than you would, right? You could go back through your old drafts and find it. This should be probably on the magnitude of years, right? Like every year, you should probably be able to look back at your work and even from a year before recognize there are mistakes and improvements. Myself, right? Like there are short stories that I wrote this past year that even 6 months from now, right, I can look back and see things I need to correct. Ian can attest, right? There was a short story that I wrote way back at the beginning of this year, back in maybe January, February, that I look back now had some grammar stuff, right? Had some typos, had stuff that had to be fixed that I didn't notice the first time, even after going through multiple drafts, just because I was too close to the project, just because maybe I wasn't quite at a good enough skill level to recognize it. But again, as time goes on, you need to be able to look back and see your old work and realize where the mistakes are. If you can, you're getting better. You are improving in
Yes.
some fashion.
Which, again, if we want to wrap this up, it's the idea that
Yep.
continuing to improve as a writer is so, so important. And
Yes.
if you are not continuing to improve, the odds are you're probably stagnating or you're not moving in a good direction. I think the best writers are the ones that continuously challenge themselves right up until the very, very end.
Agreed. No, completely. Um, yeah. And so, hope this was helpful. I hope we were able to kind of distinguish the reasons that you need to improve, kind of go over kind of things to look for, and the necessity of having others to give you feedback. If you did find this to be helpful, please give it a thumbs up. And with that, we'll be wrapping up here. This is Josh Breslin, and that's Ian M. Rogers, and we will see you all next week.
Take it easy.